There's a quiet delusion spreading right now, and it's not political. It's not men versus women, and it's not a niche internet thing. It's happening in courtrooms, living rooms, group chats, and family dinners across the country. Some divorced women genuinely believe divorce should function like retirement, not transition support while I rebuild, not help while I re enter the workforce, not temporary stability while we rebalance the finances. They mean permanent funded life. They believe that because they were once married, because a man once chose them, work is optional forever. They think alimony is a lifetime subscription. They talk like employment is beneath them, like getting a paycheck is what happens to other people. And here's the part that matters: reality does not negotiate with entitlement. Bills don't stop because you're still healing. Landlords don't accept "I used to be married" as rent. Grocery stores don't take "I deserve better" at the checkout. The power company doesn't care about your self image. You can argue with your ex. You can argue with the judge. You can argue with your parents. You can argue with your friends. You cannot argue with math. So today, I want to walk you through what happens when entitlement finally collides with reality. Why some divorced women are being forced back into adult life kicking and screaming. And why more men are saying, "I'm done funding a capable adult who refuses to participate." This is not an attack on all women. This isn't even an attack on divorced women as a group. Plenty of divorced women work, rebuild, and carry themselves with discipline and pride. This is about a specific type: the voluntary dependent, the person who isn't disabled, isn't caring for a child full time with no support, isn't trapped by circumstances, but still believes they should be financially carried because they feel like they should be. And if you're a man who's been through divorce, paying support, watching someone refuse to work while demanding more, this will put language to what you've been living. If you're a young man watching the older guys around you get financially bled out, this will clarify the risk. And if you're someone who needs a reality check about what divorce actually means in the real world, this might be the most important video you hear this year. Let's start with the core belief that fuels the whole thing. Divorce doesn't mean funded freedom. It means separation and responsibility. Divorce is a legal separation of a partnership. It's not a lifetime payout for past participation. Marriage is not a pension plan. Yes, there are situations where support is reasonable and necessary, especially when one's spouse sacrificed years of the career development to raise children, manage the household, or relocate repeatedly for the other spouse's work. Transition support exists for a reason. The problem is when transition becomes identity and support becomes entitlement. A healthy mindset sounds like this: I need time to rebuild, update my skills, and get back on my feet. I'll work the plan and become self-sufficient. The delusional mindset sounds like this: I gave years. I deserve to be taken care of indefinitely. Work is beneath me. Someone else should pay. That second mindset isn't just unattractive, it's a destructive. It turns the post-divorce period into a long, slow crash because it creates a life strategy based on one fragile assumption: someone will always rescue you. And sooner or later, that assumption breaks. The appearance as a career trap. One of the most common versions of this delusion is what I call appearance entitlement. Some women, especially women who grew up getting attention for looks, quietly internalize the idea that being attractive is a form of labor. They talk like maintaining themselves is their job. Nails, hair, gym, yoga, skincare, outfits, social media selfies. And to be fair, looking good takes effort, time, money, discipline. But here's the issue: effort isn't the same thing as value. In the real economy, value comes from producing something that other people exchange money for. You don't get paid because you tried. You get paid because you deliver. So when someone says, "I'm pretty, why should I work?" what they're really saying is, "I want the benefits of adulthood without the obligations." And there's a brutal truth they don't want to face. Beauty isn't a retirement plan. It's not even a stable asset. Attention fades. Options change. Markets shift. Age happens. Life happens. And even if you stay attractive, the question doesn't go away. What do you do? What do you bring? What do you build? I watched this play out in a case where a man's ex-wife demanded alimony, like a six-figure salary, because she maintained herself for the marriage. She framed her self-care like she was clocking in at a job. The judge asked about her employment history. She said, "I was a wife." The judge said, "You're employable. Get a job." The shock wasn't just that she didn't get what she wanted. The shock was that reality didn't respect her narrative. Because in her mind, her story should have been enough. That's the danger of entitlement. It confuses your feelings about what should be true with what is actually true. Degrees as accessories, not tools. Here's another version of the same problem: collecting education as status instead of using education as leverage. Some people rack up degrees the way other people rack up designer items. It looks impressive. It sounds impressive. It feels impressive. But the marketplace doesn't pay you for a diploma. It pays you for results. A degree without experience is not a career. It's a receipt. And the most painful reality: check comes when someone tries to jump into the job market after a long gap and expects the degree to do the work for them. They apply for high-level roles with no track record. They refuse entry-level roles because they're overqualified. They reject mid-level roles because they don't have the experience. They want executive pay because they have executive self-image. But employers are not hiring your self-image. They're hiring your competence. I've seen the anger that comes with this moment. People feel betrayed by the world. How is this fair? I got the degree. You got the degree. You didn't build the skill stack. You didn't build the work history. You didn't build the references. You didn't build the proof. And now you're trying to cash a check you never deposited. Education can be powerful, but only if it's connected to action. And for a lot of voluntarily dependent adults, action is exactly what they've been avoiding. The emotional backlash when work enters the conversation. Here's a pattern men notice immediately. The moment employment becomes the topic, the conversation stops being logical. It becomes moral. How dare you suggest I work? I raised children. I supported his career. I'm still recovering. I shouldn't have to struggle. These phrases can sometimes be valid expressions of real pain, but they can also be shields, designed to shut down the discussion before it reaches the uncomfortable truth. A capable adult is expected to support themselves. A lot of this backlash isn't about the job itself. It's about identity. Work forces a person to face where they stand in the world without special treatment. It forces them to compete. It forces them to be judged. It forces them to risk failure. And if someone has built their entire self-worth on being chosen, being provided for, being admired, being kept, employment feels like humiliation. Not because work is shameful, because reality is threatening their fantasy. So they react the way people react when a fragile identity is challenged: defensiveness, outrage, victim language. blame. And if you've ever watched someone spiral emotionally just because you asked, "What's your plan to support yourself?" You've seen this phenomenon up close. The family fallout. Entitlement has no boundaries. One of the most toxic parts of post-divorce entitlement is that it doesn't stop with the ex-husband. Once the provider system breaks, some people immediately scan for the next funding source. Parents, siblings, friends, adult children, new partners. It becomes a lifestyle of extraction. And the family conflict is predictable. They guilt their parents into draining retirement. They shame siblings for not helping. They frame their adult children as responsible for their comfort. They become resentful when anyone suggests employment. Because to an entitled mind, support is love. So if you don't fund them, you don't care. That's not love. That's manipulation dressed as emotional language. And over time, the social consequences are brutal. The people around them get tired. The sympathy dries up. The invitations stop. The calls become shorter. The help becomes conditional. And then the entitled person becomes isolated while still believing it's everyone else's fault. The double standard that flips men into rage. Here's where men start breaking psychologically. They're expected to work more while the other person works not at all. They're expected to sacrifice while the other person protects comfort. They're expected to step up while the other person refuses to step anywhere. And the messaging often sounds like this: you should do more for the kids. But when you ask, "What are you doing?" you get silence, excuses, or anger. Men aren't angry because they hate supporting children. Most men will grind themselves into the ground for their kids. Men get angry when they realize they're funding an adult's refusal to grow. Because there's a difference between supporting a child and enabling an able-bodied adult. And courts, communities, and families have historically blurred that line in ways that create resentment that doesn't go away. Dating after divorce, partners versus replacement providers. Now let's talk about the dating market, because this is where reality becomes undeniable. A self-sufficient divorced woman enters dating with options. A voluntarily dependent divorced woman enters dating with demands. And the difference shows instantly. Some people date like they're hiring a sponsor. Expensive first dates required. Gifts expected early. Maintain my lifestyle. Language. Immediate commitment pressure. That's not romance. That's a funding interview. And here's the brutal part. Quality men see it coming. They can smell it. Men who have something to lose, peace, assets, stability, don't rush towards someone who talks like a liability. So who does the dependent person attract? Often, it's not the noble provider they imagined. It's either men who want control and no dependency makes a person easier to control, or men who are unstable themselves, looking for someone to attach to, or men who are temporarily generous but eventually resentful. And that's how you get the darkest outcomes. People tolerating disrespect, chaos, or even abuse because they need housing and support but refuse to work. Dependency doesn't create safety, it creates vulnerability. Employment isn't just money, it's a leverage, it's dignity, it's options, the "I'm healing" excuse that becomes a lifestyle. There's a reasonable version of healing after divorce: therapy, rebuilding routine, stabilizing mental health, adjusting to a new life. And then there's the weaponized version: "I'm healing" as a permanent exemption from responsibility. 2 years pass, 3 years pass, 5 years pass. You're still exploring options, you're still not ready, You're still finding yourself, but you're dating, you're traveling, you're shopping, you're socializing, you're living, just not working. And that reveals the truth. It's not incapacity, it's refusal. Because trauma doesn't usually disable you, selectively, only in the areas that require effort. And courts are getting less patient with that. Judges are increasingly willing to say, you're employable. Here's the expectation. That's one reason alimony reform and time limits keep gaining momentum in many places. People are recognizing the obvious. Transitional support should be transitional. Skill, atrophy, the hidden cost nobody talks about. Here's the part that becomes tragic. The longer someone stays out of the workforce, the harder it becomes to re enter. Not because they're stupid, because the world keeps moving. Technology changes, systems change, work culture changes, hiring expectations change, entire industries evolve. So when someone has been out of the workforce for 10 or 15 years and suddenly needs a job, it's not like stepping back into the world where they left it. It's like stepping into a different planet. And the cruel irony is, the entitlement that delayed the return to work is what makes the return so painful. They're starting at zero with the ego of someone who thinks they should start at the top. That gap creates rage, and rage creates more avoidance. So they spiral. They blame age discrimination. They blame sexism. They blame the system. They blame the ex husband. They blame the economy. Meanwhile, the actual solution stays the same. Start small, build skills, stack wins, stay consistent. But that path requires humility, and entitlement hates humility. Some people will do anything to avoid work, except work. One of the most revealing things is how much energy a voluntarily dependent persons will spend avoiding responsibility, court motions, lawyer battles, support demands, emotional campaigns, social media posts, group chats, fundraising, new partner hunting, family guilt. They'll spend months manipulating the environment when 3 months of consistent work could start building a real foundation. It's not a lack of effort, it's effort applied in the wrong direction. Because the goal isn't stability, the goal is staying exempt. And as long as the goal is exemption, reality will keep landing like a hammer. The turning point, when reality finally wins, eventually something changes. It's usually one of these. Support gets reduced or ends. Family stops enabling. A new partner refuses to carry them. The cost of living rises enough that the math stops working. A judge orders job search documentation or vocational evaluation. Debt piles up enough that denial collapses. And then the choice becomes brutally simple: work or suffer. Not because anyone is being cruel, because adulthood is non negotiable. Some people will still choose suffering out of pride. They'd rather live smaller, struggle harder, and blame louder than do the one thing that solves the problem. But others finally accept the truth, and the transformation can be dramatic. The success story nobody expected. When someone finally gets a job after years of resistance, something interesting happens. They often feel better, not instantly, not perfectly, but steadily, because work provides things entitlement can't provide: structure, purpose, competence, pride, community momentum. And once a person starts stacking wins, paychecks, skills, responsibility, the identity shifts. They stop being a victim waiting for rescue. They become an adult building a life. I've watched people in their late 40s and 50s start their first real career and say years later, I can't believe I fought reality for so long. The fight wasn't with their ex, it was with adulthood. And adulthood always wins. What men should take from this? If you're a man watching this, here's the takeaway without the noise. Do not enable voluntary dependence. Support your children. Don't fund an adult's refusal to grow. Learn the difference between hardship and entitlement. One deserves compassion, the other demands submission. Protect yourself legally and financially. Know what you're signing, what the risks are, and what the laws in your area actually allow. Stop apologizing for expecting adult behavior. Get a job isn't cruelty, it's reality. Pay attention to mindset early. If someone believes they're entitled to provision without contribution, that belief doesn't improve with time. It intensifies. And if you're supporting someone right now who refuses to support themselves, understand this. Enabling feels kind in the short term, but it often creates long-term harm. Real love doesn't protect a person from reality. It prepares them for reality. What society needs to stop doing, we have to stop romanticizing dependence. We have to stop treating adult responsibility like oppression. We have to stop handing sympathy to people who are capable but unwilling. Because when you normalize entitlement, you create more of it. And you also create more backlash, especially from men who see clearly that they're being positioned as lifelong resource providers for someone who refuses to participate. That backlash is already here. It's part of why marriage rates keep dropping and why more men are hesitant to sign contracts they don't fully understand. Men aren't afraid of commitment. A lot of them are afraid of being legally tied to someone who decides work is optional but bills are mandatory. That fear isn't paranoia, it's pattern recognition. The bottom line, divorce doesn't equal retirement. Beauty isn't a job. A degree isn't a career. A past marriage isn't a paycheck. And no amount of anger, victim language, or entitlement changes the fundamental rule of adult life. Adults contribute. You either build your own stability or you live at the mercy of whoever you can convince to carry you. And that's not freedom. That's dependence with a nicer story attached. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you seen someone refuse to work after divorce? Making excuses, demanding support, burning bridges, acting shocked when reality shows up. If you've lived it, watched it, or paid for it, drop your story in the comments. And if you want more honest conversations about modern relationships, money, responsibility, and how to protect your future, subscribe.